couple of weeks ago, Nier Automata got released, and it's great. Probably the only game so far that can respectably rival Bloodborne for the throne of best game so far this generation. It seems to have sold fairly well, and most importantly, it's done very well critically. Everyone seems to be loving it, and that's great. However, if you know me at all, it shouldn't surprise you that I'm one of those guys. Yeah, one of those guys who really loved the original Nier. Yeah, that Nier. The one that got kind of panned by critics. It had its flaws to be sure, but it executed on some brilliant ideas while employing some killer character writing and acting, gorgeous music, amazing mechanical variation, and satisfying, if shallow, combat. It's a game that isn't for everyone, but by God was it for me. However, if you were to look at the raw Metacritic data, you'd be told that Nier was exactly as good as the roundly mocked Mafia 3, and that is a problem. This implies that a game that was divisive because it was buggy and broken has the exact same cultural and intellectual value as a game that's divisive because it's niche and esoteric. Reviews on their own are great, hell, I've dabbled in them myself. But where things get dicey is when we aggregate those scores and treat that score as the be-all end-all. Because one person's garbage is another's treasure, and one person's 40 is another person's 90. And failure to recognize that is hurting all of us. A big problem gaming suffers from is this idea of objective quality. This idea that we can, by some undefined set of universal metrics, determine whether a game is good or not. We see this idea manifested in the repeated calls for objective reviews that are free of judgment of the game's core design, intent, and politics. And I feel as though Metacritic is currently being used as a de facto source for these objective reviews. Now, putting aside that an objective review would be impossible due to them still having some level of implicit bias to it based on wording and tone alone, these kinds of reviews are ultimately useless. They tell you nothing of a game's actual value, whether it will appeal to you, whether or not it has content that you're either eager to engage with or avoid, or anything else. A Steam forum could tell me that Dark Souls runs at only 30 FPS, which yes, is a downside, but it won't tell me that in spite of that, the combat is airtight while being supported by some of the best enemy and level design ever created, unless I specifically ask about it. In other words, it doesn't tell me if it will suit my taste. Taste is a word that I don't feel like gets thrown around enough when we talk about games. We like to believe that all reviews and opinions are created equal, which they are. However, where that equality begins to break down is the second that review or opinion is received by someone else. Not because those opinions are wrong, but because the person espousing those opinions may not share what I value in a game. You have every right to look me in the eye and say the newest Call of Duty is amazing. Because in many ways, you're probably right. It's polished, lets you jump right into the action, and looks great and has a wealth of content. However, that will not make me want to buy it, because I know that with each new iteration of Call of Duty, it's increasingly unlikely that it will have elements that I personally find valuable in a game. The reason I started this by talking about Nier is because of this exact reason. Nier is, in a lot of ways, a highly experimental game. It's a game meant to be played through multiple times with multiple new game pluses with new content and an ending literally unlike anything else in all of gaming. Needless to say though, you will miss this experimentation if you don't play through it multiple times. And just a cursory glance at many of the negative reviews of Nier leave me with a sense that many of these critics only played through it once. Just looking at Game Informer's review where it received a 6.5 leads me to believe he did only the one playthrough, given that he mentions the ending as being uneven, which the first ending is, because it isn't the actual ending. To be clear, I am not trashing the reviewer, he did his job perfectly well. This is something that I cannot reasonably expect all reviewers with their massive workloads to do, especially if they weren't crazy about it the first time through and don't know about the secrets waiting on that second playthrough. Hell, I can't expect most casual players to do that. However, that doesn't change that I do that, and a lot of players do that. And Nier rewards people who do that, with a whole unique game experience unlike anything else that existed at the time of its release. As such, it's better suited to the tastes and approach of critics who play similarly to me. And in the same way that hypothetical COD fan I mentioned probably wouldn't want to wait 12 hours for a game to begin to truly show what makes it stand out deserves critique by people who share their values, people like me who are willing to put in that kind of energy deserve the same. And we do have those critics around. However, the nuance of that criticism on both sides of the fence gets lost when it's boiled down to a single number. The problem with Metacritic isn't Metacritic. It's how we use Metacritic as a final say on a game's quality, and how that use has harmed both developers and ourselves. It's no secret that Metacritic averages have been used by publishers to withhold bonuses in select contracts. With such massive stakes on the line, how can we expect devs, especially newer ones, to take any chances? How can we be surprised that mainstream games have become increasingly market-driven and susceptible to trends when appealing to a niche audience not only means lower units sold, but also lost bonuses and future business opportunities? Most of all, when 3 scores of 100 and 3 scores of 50 make it look like a game is only a 75, how can we not expect devs to try to make their games everything for everyone, even if it's at the expense of the core game? There's undeniably more factors than just this causing these trends, but it is equally undeniable that Metacritic is a factor. All of this is made worse by the fact that we're the ones causing this. The reason this is happening is because we put such a high value on Metacritic averages. We're the ones who consistently bust out Metacritic scores as hard proof of a game's quality or lack thereof. Hell, even I'm guilty of this. We treat it as gospel and we all need to move past that. I am not suggesting that we stop using Metacritic. Rather, I'm suggesting we begin treating it as a means to an end, instead of a functional end in and unto itself. It's a powerful tool that we need to use responsibly. In the same way you shouldn't source Wikipedia in an essay, you shouldn't let Metacritic be the only source for your interpretation of a game's quality. It should be a jumping off point instead of a conclusive one, to get multiple perspectives on a game rather than one large one. The solution here is for we, the audience, to go out of our way to figure out what it is we value in games, and find critics who share those values, while also noting the values they don't share with us. I have a critic that I know understands what makes for a great sandbox game, another who knows about great action games, and another that knows atmospheric games. That's not to say that's all they know or like, but rather that I know they hold those elements in high regard. It might be a struggle, but failure on our part to do so will only make this industry a worse place. I don't want to make it seem like Metacritic itself is perfect. Their refusal to amend scores once they have been submitted and their messy translation of non-numerical scores into their format are a company-side problem that should have been dealt with years ago. However, those problems would matter little if we, as a whole, didn't let them be. We owe it to everyone involved, both the developers who pour themselves into games and reviewers who dedicate their time to reviewing them better than what we've been giving them. Critique is the foundation of all forms of art, and until we begin respecting that critique over an unnuanced number, we'll continue to see games both culturally and as finished works as consumable knickknacks rather than meaningful pieces of art.